This is probably the most serious Pass the Cast that I have ever done. Man, I just want to hug everybody. Carla, big hug. I think Anne was second, first Pass the Cast, big hug. And oh, Heather, big hug. You amazing, amazing women for telling your story. I love you. I think the biggest thing about this subject is telling your story, not being ashamed, getting it out there, letting people know, because when you start to tell your story about this subject, there are so many other people that you're going to meet that are suddenly like, that's me. I was in that place too. I was in that spot too. There is absolutely no shame. So I am a believer that mental health is really a balance between your mind, body, and spirit, that's how God created you. And whenever there's an imbalance in any of that area, that there's an issue, there's a problem, right? And we all can say that at one point in our lives that there has been an imbalance. Some of us have had more struggles and more confrontation and harder times in that area than in others. But man, we've all experienced that, right? We've all had those moments where, those moments of imbalance. And so, in my title, I was talking about childhood trauma. I'm going to read this really quick because I looked it up. I heard about this study that I haven't done a lot of research, but this might resonate with you and might mean something to you. So I'm going to read it for really quick. It's called Adverse Childhood Experiences. Childhood experiences, both positive and negative, have a tremendous impact on a future violence, victimization, and perpetration and lifelong health and opportunity. As such, early experiences are an important public health issue. Much of the foundational research in this area has been referred to as adverse childhood experience. So childhood trauma. If you're a teacher, a preschool teacher, a teacher of young children, you often ask parents, has there anything happened in the family? Has there been a divorce? Has there been any kind of a death in the family, a sickness, a major change in the family? Because that major change will affect the child in the classroom, right? How many teachers know that? How many caregivers know that? A major change in the family, a relationship change, a broken bond change, a divorce, a separation, a new baby, new situations can affect the child in the family. And my own experience is that at 10 years old, I was suicidal. No, I wasn't actively trying to kill myself with pills, but I was constantly thinking that life would be so much better if I had never come into the world, that everybody would be so much happier if I had never come into the world. Now, I was only 10 years old, and I have encountered kids who start that negativity, that self-hatred fairly young. When you're 4, I love you guys. There's something that happens between 3s and 4s and 5 years old. There's a self-awareness that kicks in. You suddenly start comparing yourself to others. And I remember almost the day to the hour that I started doing that I started comparing myself to others. And the adults in my life, yes, and they can take on the emotions of their parents. Exactly. The adults in my life did not notice that this was happening. And then some divorce happened and some major relationship changes happened, which ended up being a trauma for me. So what happened when I was 5 affected me all the way up until I had my own kids and until I was in my 30s. Right? So what happened when I was a kid affected me my entire life. And the thing with the ACE, the adverse childhood experiences, like the first scoper said, that those things they bring an imbalance. Your body, your mind, your spirit, it brings an imbalance. And my childhood trauma can also often be one of the triggers for suicidal tendencies in teenagers. And in my local area, we what do you say? What do you call it when there's a problem with teenage suicide? Is it a problem? Yeah, it's just a problem. In my local area, there's been almost a teen suicide every year. And a lot of time the parents get on and they're like, there was no sign. We didn't notice. And my thing is, and not to make any parent ever feel bad, but the thing is there's often a sign. And maybe the parents noticed it or the teachers noticed it, but somebody somewhere noticed a disconnect. There's a disconnect. There are signs. There's a pulling back. There are writings. Girls will write. So boys are harder because they are fast. Boys are scary because once they make a decision for suicide, it's done. They make it. They do it. Girls are emotional and they will struggle over it. Not all the time. It's not cut and dried science, right? But the boys, even with the boys, there are still always signs. And a lot of times those childhood traumas that happen young, that teachers notice, that parents notice, that maybe we don't always follow through on, those come back. Just like, so if you've got a 2-year-old, right? I always tell this to parents of teenagers, that what you don't deal with in your 2-year-old will come back to bite you in the butt when they hit puberty. It's the same kind of thing. The emotional traumas that we don't deal with in childhood come back to bite us. They don't just go away. And this whole science about adverse childhood experiences is the doctors are starting to say, did you have a child trauma? And when they talk about it, when they express it, exactly, 1941-42, when you get a chance to talk about it or you share that experience with somebody else, maybe you don't talk about it, but you're in a group of people who's also experienced your trauma, that it begins the healing process. And society has made this so complicated, right? Society has made mental health so complicated. They've labeled it. They've shamed it. They've shamed our boys for being, angry and aggressive. They've shamed our girls for being emotional and having deep feelings. We've got to, we shame people for being too fat, too skinny, and we don't, instead of just saying, I accept you as you are, and let's talk about what you're going through. Instead of that, we're afraid to deal with it in ourselves. Okay, one more thing. Who's next? I need you to put up emojis. One more thing. Do you know that my pastor once told me that thing later in marriage that starts to annoy you about your spouse is the thing that you most don't like in yourself? Do you know that and make it expensive too? Exactly. There's Julie. So do you know that that's the same thing that we don't like in other people? That same thing that we don't like in our spouse, that same thing that we don't like in ourselves, the same thing we're ashamed of is the same thing we don't like in other people. Hey, Shan, you got to go to the next scope. Thank you guys. Julie Jordan Scott is live. She actually was and helped in the mental health field. So she was a social worker, I think. Go follow her. Thank you for listening. Thank you for joining. Be blessed. Have a great evening. I love you. Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing this moment with me and with the PeriGirls. I'll talk to you later. I'll see you in the next scope.